Hi, this is Madison, and today I'm talking to you about the same five people, and everyone knows these five people. So let me start with a story. I was teaching a group of adult Hebrew students basic grammar when one of my students, who is a Christian lay leader, asked if he could talk to me after class for some advice. At first, he had been only leading services once a month, maybe helping with a Bible study every few weeks. But gradually, more responsibility kept being added to his plate. And this is someone who already has a big demanding job during the week. But gradually, more responsibility just kept piling on. And eventually, the clergy leadership asked him to take over the Sunday afternoon service every single week. And now he felt overwhelmed and trapped. He felt responsible for something he no longer knew how to step away from. He didn't have any good boundaries. And honestly, I think almost every small congregation understands this feeling. The problem of exhausted clergy relying on exhausted volunteers is not new, but it is something we rarely discuss honestly. Because over time, many congregations quietly become dependent on the same small group of reliable people. The people who always say yes, the people who always show up, the people who know how things work or where things are stored. And eventually those people stop becoming volunteers and they start to become part of the infrastructure. And honestly, part of that problem is that leaders naturally ask reliable people first. It's faster, it's easier, it's less risky. If you know someone will complete the task, the temptation is always there to ask them again. But over time, this creates a closed system where the same people carry more and more responsibility while newer people never fully develop ownership of the community, or they may even feel shut out. And that's a mistake because healthy congregations do not grow by overusing reliable people. They grow by helping more people become reliable people. People need ownership of the piece of a community. They need to feel that they belong to something larger than simply attending. I would like to tell you a marching band story. Years ago, my son was deeply involved in a marching band organization. It competed regularly all over the place. At the time, I happened to be between jobs, and because I cared about the organization and wanted to spend more time with my son, I offered to temporarily fill an empty board position for the remainder of the year. And honestly, I was excited to help, but I was turned down because the new board president was unsure whether they could legally hold a mid-year election to fill the position. Now, maybe there were real procedural concerns, but the problem was how it was handled. Instead of her saying to me, let me see if we can make this work, or if we can't fill the board position officially, maybe there's another meaningful way that you can help, the conversation simply ended. And from that moment, they lost a highly motivated volunteer. For the next several years, while my son was in band, I never volunteered again. Not because I was angry, but because ownership had been rejected instead of cultivated. And I think congregations accidentally do this all the time. We say we need help, but sometimes when people actually offer to help, our systems are not prepared to meaningfully receive them. In fact, sometimes people say, I'd like you to help, but I don't have anything in place or put together to even be able to get them to help. The student in my Hebrew class genuinely wanted to help his congregation. He enjoyed leading the occasional service. He enjoyed Bible study. He loved learning. That's why he was in a Hebrew class. But eventually, what started as volunteering became obligation. And this is the trap for reliable volunteers. Worse, leadership quietly stepped back from him while the expectations from the community kept increasing. The leadership stepped back and think, hey, he's got it covered. Meanwhile, they don't know all the demands and things that are happening that he's handling. At some point, many volunteers stop asking, how can I help? And quietly, they begin wondering, what happens if I stop? And this is a dangerous place for a congregation to be, because volunteers staying only out of guilt are often only one good excuse away from leaving completely. And honestly, sometimes nobody's filling their bucket when they do leave. Everybody is simply taking from the same exhausted people. Thankfully, in this particular case, the situation eventually improved. A woman who had wanted to help lead services was finally added to the rotation after initially being denied an opportunity. And suddenly, the burden became more shared. My student had more time for his wife, and as we joke, he has more time for his learning Hebrew and his homework. So he could finally participate in community life again instead of only just carrying the burden of that community life. But let's talk about unreliable systems creating dependency. Sometimes the problem is not the people, it's the system itself. When systems are inefficient or constantly breaking down, communities often compensate by leaning harder and harder on dependable volunteers. And honestly, I catch myself doing this too. Every year around Passover, we have systems that overwork the small number of volunteers we have available. Each year, I try to improve those systems. At some point in the future, if something can't be improved, we may need to let part of it go. Not because the tradition lacks value, but because the cost of maintaining that system becomes too high for the too few people who are supporting it. And this is one of the hardest realities for small congregations to accept. Many communities still remember when they were larger. I remember visiting the congregation I now lead around 15 years ago during high holy holidays. There were no seats available. I literally got the last seat. People behind me were standing. But we need to be careful not to exhaust our remaining volunteers trying to maintain every program and every tradition exactly as they existed during a different era. For the past several years, our congregation has not had the volunteer capacity to fully assemble our large sukkah. And honestly, that hurts. But we have had to learn to work within the reality of what our current community can sustainably support. Not every tradition can survive unchanged forever. And pretending otherwise sometimes breaks the people still trying to hold the community together. Now let's talk about clergy burnout. And clergy leaders need to be very careful too, because burnout transfers downward as our energy as leaders is contagious. And when leaders become chronically exhausted, resentful, or defeated, that energy spreads into the community around them. And I understand this personally. At some point, I had to start setting clearer limits. I had to learn to say to people, I can be a spiritual leader or I can be your caterer, but I cannot realistically be both. Now, that does not mean leaders need to appear joyful every moment. We all get tired. But it does mean we must be careful not to unintentionally demoralize the very people still trying to help us. Now let's talk about temporary help. And congregations also need to be very careful with this one as well. They need to understand that temporary help does not quietly become permanent obligation. If you ask someone to temporarily fill in a position, it is temporary. No one wants to become known as the clergy leader or the lay leader or any service leader who gives the gift that keeps on giving, meaning that every time someone volunteers, they're rewarded with even more work. Because eventually people stop volunteering entirely. And if it keeps up again, eventually people stop coming entirely. But at the same time, sometimes you do discover a perfect match, and that's wonderful. Sometimes a volunteer tries something once and genuinely finds joy, ownership, and meaning in it. Those are beautiful moments. A long time ago, I had a lady who very at last minute came in and filled in for me on the soundboard. And ever since then, she enjoyed it so much and she became a regular on the soundboard. So sometimes that perfect fit, that perfect job just works. And those are beautiful moments because healthy participation grows best from meaning and connection, not guilt nor exhaustion. So honestly, I think this is one of the greatest challenges facing many congregations today. Healthy communities are not sustained by endlessly extracting more work from the same exhausted people. They are sustained by continually helping more people develop ownership, confidence, and meaningful participation. Because when people feel genuine ownership of a community, they stop feeling like temporary helpers and begin to feel like they truly belong there. So this is Small Bima Big Torah, where small communities and their very real challenges deserve to be part of the conversation. And I invite you to take a few minutes and post something in the chat below, some kind of message that lets me know maybe you're experiencing this too. And maybe you have a situation to share with us that we can learn from. Or it just helps us feel better because we know we're not alone. Somewhere we need to start the conversation. So, thank you.